in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. This is Steve Nelson, President of the Nebraska Farm Bureau, and I welcome you to this evening's webinar. I hope that the day finds you well. I know that much of the state has had some nice weather here. Some areas in the south and the east have had some rain over the weekend, but I know that that didn't spread to a large part of the state where it's very, very dry yet. So again, hopefully things are going well for you, and people are getting involved in some spring work, I know, as I traveled home over the Easter weekend, and I'm sure that that will continue as the nice days continue. Have in the room tonight Anthony Arts, who will talk about state affairs here in a little bit, and I'll turn the program over to Jerry Ferris now, who will give you some details about the webinar and how we will proceed. So anyway, good evening, and I'll say a few words when we close up at the end, but look forward to hearing the updates from Anthony and Jordan Dux, who is on the webinar from his home. So anyway, Jay, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Most of you hopefully have gone through this once or twice on the webinar process, but I will quickly explain how we'll do this. If you do have a question at any time, you can simply type your question in a question box that's in your control panel. You can also raise your hand. There's a little hand icon. If you raise that, I will see that and I can unmute you. Currently, all of you that are attending have a muted microphone, but you do need to have a microphone on your computer or be calling in over the phone for that to work. Otherwise, sometimes it's just easiest to type that question in and we will get it asked to the presenter. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan to start the update on national affairs. Jordan, I think your mic is still muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, everyone. Good evening. Hopefully everyone's doing well. I had the opportunity to be where we got over the course of 2 days about a half-inch rain. So that's in southeast Nebraska by Fairbury, which was nice to see. A lot of farms were starting to do work, like Steve said, and hopefully not everyone was too shook after yesterday, where the drop in corn prices and everything. Unfortunately, that's for the corn farmers. Fortunately for the livestock farmers, those types of folks would try to take advantage of the of the misfortune of others, but that's, I guess, the nature of the game. But I wanted to run over a couple of things, and those that have been on this webinar, some of these slides are going to look familiar. Some of these slides are going to look a little new. I want to run through some things, specifically starting out with one of the things that I dealt with, that I've been dealing with for the past couple of weeks, that I know you all are also starting to deal with now, trying to get finalized here, and that, quite frankly, is the if I can get my thing to work here, the SPCC regulation, Spill Prevention and Control Countermeasure regulation from EPA. This is something that I've been on the phone. I had about 5 phone calls today with folks having questions about SPCC. What do they need to do to be in compliance? When do the rules take effect? So on and so forth. And so I wanted to quickly run through this again. For the folks that have been on our webinars before, this might be repeat for them, but for the number of phone calls I've gotten, for the interest that we've received, I wanted to run through it again so folks would have some information on it. Starting out with the rule basics. Number one, this rule was developed in the 1970s. It was developed to regulate oil refineries, gas stations, airports, areas where they have large fuel storage capacity. Large areas where they have a lot of fuel and oil-based products stored in one location. It wasn't supposed to affect farms, but in 2009, the EPA was looking at this rule. They basically ruled that farms have never been exempt before. You weren't specifically exempt in the rule itself, and so why should you actually be exempt? And so after a couple of a lot of work dealing with this particular regulation, basically At first, EPA said that farms needed to be in compliance in 2010, and then there was a delay in the rule to where farms needed to be in compliance. The latest date that you saw, probably until the final date that I'll talk about here at the end, but the date that you all heard was the mid part of May to be in compliance. The rule is broken into two specific tiers. The first tier is your lower end, which is if you fit into this. I mean, if you have to have an SPCC plan, this is what constitutes you needing one. And that is if you have fuel storage capacity. That's capacity. That's not fuel you have on hand, but that's capacity down to a 55-gallon container of 1,320 gallons to 10,000 gallons. If you fit within that, 1,320 to 10,000, with a reasonable expectation of that spill going into a water of the U.S., and I'll explain that in a second, but if you have in between those two numbers, 1,320 to 10,000, you need to have an SPCC, spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plan. Farmers and ranchers, if you fit into this, if you guys fit into this tier 1, you can self-certify. There's a template available on the EPA website that is available for you to fill out. It's a number of pages. It's not short, but you can fill this template out, and it kind of runs through the rule for you. And the idea of this rule is you're trying to come up with a plan and follow what you would do in case you were to have a spill, a fuel spill. That's kind of the idea of it. So that's what the plan is. It's a plan that you would run through, that you would work through in case you were to have that oil spill. So you can self-certify if you fit into that tier 1, 1,320 to 10,000. You can use that online template that's available on the EPA website. However, if you have a tank, if you're still in that tier 1, but you have a tank that's 5,000 gallons or more, you cannot use that template. You can use other examples that are available on EPA's website, but it's a little different if you've got a tank that's above 5,000 gallons. The important part of this, and where it's going to, it's the money part, where folks are going to have to spend some money, is going to have to be the secondary containment. That would likely be a part of any SPCC plan. You're going to have that berm or that secondary containment around your fuel if you fit into that gallon limit. Now, the important thing that I negated to say was that it's 1,320 to 10,000 at any one location. And this is one of the areas where EPA has been a little vague as to what constitutes a location. In my opinion, when we've talked to EPA, what we've gathered is that to use the example, if you have a farmyard, it doesn't really matter how big it is. If you've got a yard where your home sits, or even where you have a shop and you have a couple other things here and there, but if that's really in one space, then that would constitute a location. If you farm a couple quarters of ground that sit next to each other, and you've got tanks at pivots on each separate quarter, again, this is what we've been told by EPA. Those would most likely constitute two separate locations. If you would like a better explanation of that, if you'd like a guarantee one way or the other, it's always best to talk to an engineer or give a phone call to the EPA, and we can talk about that. If you need those numbers, we can certainly provide those for you. So that's tier 1. Tier 2 is the larger end. So again, if you have fuel storage capacity down to a 55-gallon container at any one location of above 10,000 gallons, with a reasonable expectation of that spill going into a water of the U.S., you must have that plan, that SPCC plan, certified with a licensed engineer. And you can go onto the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality, their website, and there's a way to, if you go on the left-hand side, there's some links there that you could follow, and they'll give you a list of licensed engineers that you could call. If you have more questions on where to look for a licensed engineer, let me know, and I can certainly show that to you since I've got my computer here pulled up. The secondary containment, again, would likely be a part of your SPCC plan. But The part that I wanted to get into is this waters of the U.S. with this reasonable expectation of that spill going into a water of the U.S. This is also a pretty murky area when it comes to EPA. I know there's been some information that's been sent out there that farmers, you can look at this and you can print out a piece of paper and it'll say you've done some looking and you don't believe that your spill would go into a river. It wouldn't go into a lake. It wouldn't go into a pond. If you were to have a spill, that probably wouldn't be a possibility. However, I will tell you that when we've had our conversations with EPA, they've been clear's the wrong word because they've been pretty murky on this area, but it would be very difficult for a farmer to fit into that. If some folks have read through the Nebraska Farmer article from today, that they interviewed someone from Kansas Farm Bureau, Steve Swather, who has dealt with this issue. We worked with Steve for a very long time on this issue. He was down at the Region 7 office with us, chatting with the Region 7 administrator, talking about this particular issue. And he said in there, and it's something that we've said for a while, it would be very difficult for a farmer not to fit into that reasonable expectation of a spill going into a water of the U.S. It just would be very difficult for that to happen because of the expanded and liberal way that EPA has been looking at the definition of waters of the U.S. It constitutes ditches, waterways, things that you wouldn't think of, but those all are being looked at by EPA as a way for that spill to get into a water of the U.S. The cost at the bottom there, you can see the cost for the use of an engineer runs anywhere $2,000 to $4,000 depending upon what you want to do. That's a broad number. You can find some that will be lower. You can find some that will be higher. But that's just an average number that we've been told in the conversations that we've had with a couple of engineering firms that are doing Tier 1 and Tier 2 plans. Again, you don't have to have an engineer look at Tier 1. Some folks have been. But again, you do have to have an engineer look at a Tier 2 storage facility. We'll get back to that, and we can I guess we'll come back to that one for questions. And if you do have any questions on SPCC, I'd be more than willing to talk about that one. That's the rule. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about again is what do we do about it? Because this isn't something, when it comes to Farm Bureau, we try to solve problems. We don't just work within this particular regulation. We provide the information for you in order to come into compliance, but then there's the other part. We feel, it's Farm Bureau's opinion, when you look at our policy that's been developed by you folks, it was very clear that we wanted to try to change the SPCC rule. 1,320 gallons, in our opinion, is not, as any, and I think in anyone's opinion, isn't a whole lot of fuel. And the cost of compliance it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and when you talk to EPA, they really can't give you definitive evidence that farm and ranch spills have been a problem. Now, I can't say that there haven't been any, because there have. But quite frankly, it hasn't been an epidemic of farmers having fuel spills, for the main reason that it's awfully expensive to try to refill those tanks. So what we've tried to do is we've been trying to work with Congress to try to pass legislation to alter the rule. Over on the Senate side and on the House side, the bill is pretty similar. It's called the Farmers Undertake Environmental Land Stewardship Act, the Fuels Act. On the Senate side, it was introduced in March 7th. It was introduced earlier over on the House side. The Senate bill does not yet, I don't believe, have a bill number to it yet. It's still pretty new. But the House bill is H.R. 311. The bill on the Senate side is co-sponsored by both Senator Fisher and Senator Johanns. On the House side, Congressman Terry and Congressman Smith have co-sponsored it. Congressman Fortenberry has not yet. But what we've been trying to do is get this piece of legislation passed. And what it would do is it would not exempt agriculture directly. It would not do that. It is difficult to try to exempt an industry It's tough to do that politically, and so we came around, and after negotiations with other agricultural organizations and folks in Congress, we came up with what this bill would do, and that is essentially bump the Tier 1 and Tier 2 levels up. So Tier 1, as you can see, Tier 1, again, 1320 to 10,000. Tier 2 is anything above 10,000. What this bill would do is bump Tier 1 beginning at 10,000 gallons. So instead of 1320 at the bottom end, it would be 10,000 at the bottom end, and it would go all the way up to 42,000 gallons. So that would be Tier 1. You could self-certify if you had fuel storage capacity of 10,000 to 42,000 at any one location. Tier 2, when you'd have to have your plan certified by an engineer, would be anything above 42,000. It doesn't pull all farms and ranches out of it, and we certainly understand that. I know I've heard from some folks that are still concerned with the rule because they're above that 10,000 gallon threshold, and we certainly understand it. But in our opinion, and when we've talked to folks, this has been really kind of the best case scenario that we could have gotten when it came to trying to get Congress to do something. We've had some trouble getting this bill passed over the past couple of years. We have some confidence that we can have a good shot at trying to get it passed this year, but it'll take some work. And it'll take some work on our part, and it'll take some work on your part as well, because we're going to in the next couple months, in the next 6 months, try to do a push to try to get the House or the Senate to adopt this particular bill and attach it to something so we can try to get it passed. It will most likely not pass on its own. It's going to be attached to something. We're going to rely on you folks to make those phone calls, to send in those emails, follow through on action alerts that we send out to try to get these two bills passed. And it's going to be important that these folks, while they may be with us, and Senator Fisher's right on top of this, Senator Johan's right on top of this bill, as well as Congressman Terry, Congressman Smith. These guys are all on top of it. Every member of our delegation's on top of this issue, but they need that backup. They need to know that folks are with them, that farmers and ranchers are with them on this, and that they support their efforts. And so that's where we'll be calling on you folks to send in some contacts, send in some emails, phone calls, those types of things. Now, I said early on in the beginning of the presentation on this one that the due date was early May for folks to come into compliance. And you probably have seen that. If you read that Nebraska Farmer article, it said that as well. However, as a part of the continuing resolution bill that passed 2 weeks ago, continuing resolution is what funds the federal government for the rest of the fiscal year if Congress doesn't do the budget process the way it's been set up before. So there's kind of it's a kind of legislative lingo. They pass a bill, a continuing resolution to fund the federal government. And this one, for the rest of the fiscal year, they were able to attach a rider to this particular piece of legislation that would delay enforcement. EPA cannot enforce this rule on farms and ranches through the end of the fiscal year. And so that would mean October 1st is when you'd have to be, the start of compliance date, when they could actually enforce it. And that's kind of where we're at there. So the early May date is no longer valid. You've got some more time to come into compliance. The problem with this rule, as it is with a lot of these federal regulations, is that we talk about what the rule is, we talk about what we'd like to do in terms of legislation, and you folks are stuck in the middle. Because I will tell you that the cost of non-compliance, if you were to have a spill and EPA asked if you had an SPCC plan and you said no, the cost in terms of a fine would be substantial. It's a pretty large fine. And so while we try to give you kind of the best of both worlds, we try to educate folks as best we can on what the rule is and what you need to do to come into compliance, and then we try to give you some information as to what you can do to try to fix this before this becomes a problem. That October 1st date, that's kind of our deadline. If we can get this thing passed, if we can get this legislation passed before then folks won't have to worry about it, and folks won't have to spend a bunch of money to come into compliance. And so we're going to try to kick this thing, like I said, pretty hard and try to get this passed. And so as we've told EPA, as we've told the press when they've asked about this rule, no one wants to break the law. But when it comes to this rule, we view it as both unnecessary and also extremely burdensome. And so we're going to try everything we can to try to get this particular piece of legislation passed, get those thresholds changed, and put the regulatory burden back to where it was originally intended. So that's where we're at with SPCC. I want to talk real quick about some budget. I want to talk about some specific policy riders that occurred in some of this budget conversation. And then lastly, I'll conclude with a brief discussion on the Farm Bill. And again, I apologize for folks that have been on the call before, on the webinar before. I'll try to hit some new stuff here, but some of it might look the same. And so quite frankly, what role does ag play in the current federal budget battle? Because folks, if you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen the discussion on the news, if you haven't heard congressmen and senators talk about it all the time, there is definitely a budget battle going on in D.C. right now. And it started with sequestration, this term that was talked about for a very long time at the beginning of the month, beginning of last month, excuse me, and it took effect at the beginning of March. Sequestration, it's across-the-board budget cuts, and it was a part of, it was kind of a fail-safe if Congress couldn't come to an agreement on some directed budget cuts. Because Congress hasn't been able to work together on nearly anything, that process failed, and so we're stuck with sequestration, which is across-the-board budget cuts over 10 years of $1.2 trillion. For 2013, we're looking at an $85 billion cut, and that affects all areas of the federal budget, all departments. Now, of course, like most things, sequestration is not created, each department is not created equal in terms of what cut sequestration would affect. USDA does have they're going to lose some significant funding. However, there are certain programs in USDA that are not affected, like the Federal Crop Insurance Program, like the SNAP program, otherwise known as the Food Stamp Program, like the CRP program. There are certain contractual programs that are not affected by sequestration. Oddly enough, congressmen and senators, their salary is not affected by sequestration either. And I guess that's a debate for another day. But on the agricultural side, one of the big things that we were following under sequestration was the cut that was being threatened to the Federal Meat Inspector program. And as you all know, if there are no federal meat inspectors, the slaughter plants that populate Nebraska do not run. And that would be not only a big problem for the meat packing plants in Nebraska, across the country, but also for the livestock producers as well. And so after a lot of political conversation and politics being the key word here, there was an effort to try to reinstate that funding. Congress believed that USDA had flexibility put within their budget, that they could move some funding around and not have this issue, but it appeared that Secretary Vilsack was more interested in talking about it than really trying to fix the problem. And so, as a part of this continuing resolution that I talked about before, which funded the federal government through the rest of the fiscal year, they provided $55 million for the federal meat inspectors. They provided that funding. It is there. The meat packing facilities will now be operational, and there will be no furloughs of those meat inspectors. Again, another important thing to note in that continuing resolution was the SPCC enforcement delay, as I mentioned before. We feel that if Congress was able to tackle that particular policy initiative in the CR, then maybe they'd be willing to take a look at it as a part of a larger piece of legislation and put in a permanent fix. So that's what gives us some hope to try to get that put in at some point in time this year. Another important provision that was included in there, as some folks may have heard this is kind of, it wasn't snuck in as much as what the folks that opposed this particular provision believe. This is not something that was snuck in. It was a particular provision that was put in because of the issue that we had with sugar beets a few years ago. For the folks out west that plant sugar beets that remember, we had Roundup Ready sugar beets that constituted a very vast majority of the sugar beet seed market. That genetic trait was approved by USDA through an expedited procedure. Environmental groups sued USDA saying that they did not go through the proper procedures to get that genetic trait approved. And so what was included in this bill would fix what happened after the lawsuits happened. And what happened was there was a judge that ordered the destruction of Roundup Ready sugar beet seed, and would prevent farmers from planting that Roundup Ready sugar beet seed. As you all can imagine, the availability of conventional seed was nowhere near what it needed to be to meet sugar beet demand, sugar beet seed demand, and so the possibility of sugar shortages was very real. And so it eventually worked itself out. But essentially, this provision in here would solve that particular problem, where if a trait that had been approved before, a trait has to have been approved by USDA before to be affected by this provision. But what it would do was allow farmers to continue to plant that trait, a seed with that trait, even in the face of a court challenge. They can continue to plant that. Again, it's for this sugar beet reason, and so that seed is available to producers. Just because an environmental group who doesn't like GMOs to begin with has sued the federal government on this, farmers still need to have seed available to them. And in the case of Roundup Ready sugar beets, it would have been unbelievably difficult to try to find. It would have been impossible, quite frankly, impossible to find enough seed to meet seed demand. And so this provision, which only runs to the end of the fiscal year, so again, this one would, it's law today, but that language would run out after the end of the fiscal year, but would allow farmers to continue to plant seeds with those traits if that seed had been pre-approved and if they're in the face of a court challenge, if an environmental group opposes that trait and they sue the federal government. So those are some important things that happened on the continuing resolution end, on the CR, that opens, I think it's some important things to note policy-wise in that particular piece of legislation. The other thing that happened a couple weeks ago, right after the CR vote took place, was the House and the Senate voted on the federal budget for fiscal year 2014. Congress was actually acting like they're supposed to. They actually pass things ahead of time. And the idea is they're going to try to get a budget passed. Now, I will note right away, as an aside here, that the budget that was passed in the House and the budget that passed in the Senate will most likely not go anywhere. It's probably not going to receive a vote in either side. If it does, it will definitely not pass either of them. And so these initiatives I'm going to talk about they were not made law. But what's important to note is the precedent that it sets, that Congress is willing to take a vote on it, and also willing to either pass or deny them. And so a couple things you can see: a GMO fish labeling issue. They wanted some federal funding put in place to fund the labeling of genetically modified fish, specifically genetically modified salmon. That passed by a voice vote. That speaks loudly and not in a good way. We've been dealing with this GMO battle for a long time, and if the body's willing to allow something like that, the labeling of a GMO fish to be included in there, it speaks negatively as to what we can expect maybe for GMO crops as we move forward. But again, this did not take effect. This is not going to receive an up or down vote. But again, it's the message that it sends that it passed. The Keystone XL pipeline, whether you agree or disagree with the Keystone XL pipeline, just wanted to note that there was an amendment that was put in to the budget on the Senate side. All these are Senate amendments, by the way. But on the Senate side, there was basically an amendment that would support the Keystone XL pipeline and the building of it, and that passed by a vote of 62 to 37. That's a pretty big number for that particular amendment. Healthcare reform, Senator Johans introduced an amendment that would eliminate the caps that the new healthcare reform law placed on flex spending accounts and health savings accounts. Again, that passed. And so that speaks loudly. If they're willing to, and it passed by a considerable vote, if they're willing to do some of those types of things, what other changes can they make to the health care law? Will we see some changes to the new health care law in the next year? And so the fact that that passed the Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats who passed the health care reform law, speaks pretty loudly. There were also some Farm Bill decisions made, and basically they came up with a spending plan, and that was that $23 billion in Farm Bill spending needed to be saved. And that's on the Senate side. Again, that's the same thing that the Senate negotiators had tried to come up with. This is something that was a part of conversations for a very long time. But they again reiterated in the law that the next Farm Bill, at least on the Senate side, needed to save around $23 billion in spending over the course of 10 years. And so that's kind of what leads us into, lastly, the Farm Bill. And again, if you look at on the Senate and the House side, not much has changed over the past couple months. Harry Reid introduced the Senate bill again, the bill that passed the Senate last year. He reintroduced that bill, and the budget numbers, as I said, would be decided during the overall budget discussion, i.e., they were decided. The Senate needs to trim $23 billion from Farm Bill spending, and so that's what they're going to. That's what they're going to try to do. The timeline remains very unclear in the Senate. I think there's a very good chance you'll see a Farm Bill pass the Senate, but what that bill looks like yet remains to be seen. Obviously, the elimination of direct payments will be a part of that, but what exactly that bill looks like, I think, still is a very large question. On the House side, dairy, as I've said before, continues to be a very large disagreement. Speaker Boehner does not like the reforms made to the dairy program, and so that continues to be a large disagreement. SNAP cuts will continue to cause problems. You have the Senate, which trimmed $4 billion from SNAP, or otherwise known as food stamps. And you had the House that trimmed $16 billion. And trying to find a bridge between 4 and 16 was another one of the main reasons that bill did not pass last year. And so trying to get that come to an agreement between those two numbers is going to be important. The timeline on the House side is more unclear than the Senate, because you've got House negotiators on the House Ag Committee that want assurances that all the hard work they're going to do is actually going to lead to something. You have the House Ag Committee, which spent a very long day, an unbelievably long day, running through hundreds of amendments on the Farm Bill last year, just to see that work, failed, and really it didn't go anywhere after the House Ag Committee. And so trying to get that bill to the House floor, get the bill to the Senate floor, have them both pass and come together in a conference and try to get an overall Farm Bill passed is going to be difficult, but we still think it can be done. The most important thing, again, I'm going to reiterate, as I did during the SPCC part of the conversation, one of the main reasons we didn't get a Farm Bill passed last year is because folks in Congress didn't hear about it as much when they went home. And that wasn't necessarily your fault. There were larger issues. There were tax issues. There were, estate taxes, some of those bigger issues that folks were focusing in on. Not that the Farm Bill is not important, but folks had federal crop insurance, which in our opinion needs to be the central part of the next Farm Bill. But it's going to be extremely important as we move forward through this spring and this summer, if you have that opportunity in between doing all the work that you already do, but making those calls to the House and Senate members and putting in that push that we need to pass a Farm Bill this year. That's going to be extremely important. It's going to be very valuable for us in trying to actually get this bill passed. It's one of the things it's one of our top issues. It's one of the things we're going to try to push on as hard as we can, and we're going to rely on you all a little bit to help us get this bill over the finish line if we can yet this year. That's it for me. If folks have any questions, I'd be more than willing to answer those now on anything I've talked about or any other issues that you may have a question on.
Yeah, and Jordan is wrapped up. If there are any questions, once again, you can simply type any question into the question box on your control panel, or you can raise your hand. And I see we do have a hand raised, so I'm going to turn John Miller. I'm going to turn your mic on. You are unmuted, so if you have your question and you have a microphone, go ahead and ask it now. Okay, John, we're not hearing you. So you could, John, I'm going to go ahead and mute your microphone. Let's try it again. Looks like you might be calling in. Sorry, are there any other questions? Okay. Well, I know Jordan is planning on sticking around for a little bit, so if there are any other questions on national issues, you can feel free to ask them, and we will be able to get in touch with Jordan. So with that, I'm going to change the presenter over to Anthony. And Anthony, you'll need to click on show your screen. Yep, you are ready. I can unmute you probably. Okay, you're ready to go, Anthony.
Okay, you're ready to go. All right, thanks a lot, Jay. I'm going to be flying solo here on the state issue update tonight, so do my best to give you guys a little bit of more information about what's been happening down at the state capitol over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to start by giving some status updates on some issues that occupied a lot of our time earlier on in the session and have to some degree been kind of resolved here going forward, and then move into some of the bills and issues that we're really focusing on, sort of on the ground right now down at the Capitol. So I'm going to start with talking about the progress that's been made in terms of tax reform, or at least discussions about tax reform. Obviously, LB 405 and 406, the governor's tax reform bills introduced earlier this session. We came out in strong opposition to that, along with a number of other groups like manufacturing and nonprofit, hospitals, education. And those bills were then effectively withdrawn by Senator McCoy, who introduced them from the Revenue Committee. Instead, the legislature decided to focus on LB 613, which would essentially act as a vehicle going forward into the interim to create and carry out conversation about what a modern tax system should look like in Nebraska. What's a fair tax system, an equitable tax system? The way that bill currently reads, and it was advanced to the select file after withstanding a filibuster from Senator Chambers, who was upset because one of his own tax-related bills did not get advanced out of the Revenue Committee. The way it currently reads, it would create an 11-member commission consisting of the Revenue Committee members, and then the chair people of Ag, Health and Human Services, Education, and Appropriations. I'm missing one right now, but it's not coming to me. Furthermore, there's been a couple other bills that have been kicked out of the Revenue Committee. While most of them have basically become stuck in the Revenue Committee pending this larger discussion on tax reform, one bill that Farm Bureau is extremely interested in that was kicked out of the Revenue Committee is LB 96, which would create a sales tax exemption for agricultural repair parts, which we have policy that strongly supports. That bill, like I said, was kicked out of the Revenue Committee, but it has not been placed on the agenda for floor debate yet. So going forward, Farm Bureau is going to be really, thinking hard about, what issues are the most important issues to farmers and ranchers. How can we be most effective in achieving our objectives? And what I mean by that is obviously, if you ask most farmers and ranchers, they'll tell you property taxes are the big issue for them. But going forward, we're going to have to be prepared not only to be offensive in trying to achieve some of our goals, but actually also be, somewhat defensive in terms of not losing ground, because there, are more urban senators than they used to be, and they perhaps don't understand why the agricultural tax policy is formatted the way it is. And so in order to sort of achieve some of these goals, Farm Bureau has decided to form an internal ad hoc tax advisory task force consisting of members to basically discuss and really get down to the nitty-gritty policy details of what do we want to achieve through this tax discussion going forward. How would we like to see Nebraska's tax system reformed in a way that's beneficial to agriculture? So that's kind of where things are on the tax reform update. So that bill will be coming up on select file and probably will meet some more opposition from Senator Chambers. Another issue that consumed a lot of our time early on was LB 354, which was a bill that would basically restructure and modify the corn checkoff program at the state here in Nebraska. This bill would effectively move the Corn Board out from underneath governmental oversight, creating basically a quasi-governmental agency. Furthermore, there are several things about the bill that our policy does support. For instance, it would be the board would now be elected by corn growers. The checkoff would be still mandatory, but folks would have a right to refund. And then also any change in the checkoff rate would have to pass through a producer referendum. But there was one big sticking point from the perspective of Farm Bureau policy, and that was the language in the bill that would allow 25% of annual corn checkoff budget to be used to influence, to undertake federal lobbying. Farm Bureau cooperated with other concerned organizations. That provision permitting federal lobbying was removed from the bill, which we supported, and instead regulations were agreed upon by Farm Bureau, Corn Growers Association, Corn Board, and the Congress or the senator who introduced the bill, which would essentially, I think, then go before the Corn Board and be approved by the Corn Board. These regulations would just set parameters on the types of activities that the board could undertake in terms of federal lobbying if it chooses to do so. The bill does not prohibit federal lobbying. It doesn't explicitly permit it. And so in the event that the board does choose to lobby at the federal level, these regulations would govern how they could do that, what type of activities they could undertake, and it would keep the focus of their lobbying if they chose to do it on marketing, promotion, and research, which are the original purposes, I believe, of the checkoff program in the first place. And furthermore, nothing can be done publicly. So that's where the corn checkoff bill is. It has passed the general file, but it has not been scheduled for floor debate yet either. But it has been made a priority bill. A bill that was up last week, which is obviously very important to agriculture, is LB 517, which is Senator Carlson's water funding bill. This bill would create an interim task force, which has been worked up to a 28-member task force consisting of the Natural Resource Commission, 10 members appointed by the governor from agriculture and other interest groups, I guess, and then also the chairman of the Natural Resources Commission and director of the DNR. And what this task force would undertake would be to create a roadmap identifying priority water funding needs going forward. And these needs would fall into four main areas: research, data, and modeling, conjunctive management of groundwater and surface water, interstate compact compliance, and infrastructure development. And this commission, or this task force, would have a report developed that would then be presented to the legislature next session. And what this bill really is intended to do is complement another bill introduced by Senator Carlson, 516, which would actually go forward in locking in some of this funding for the long term, so a dedicated funding source for water management here in our state. So that bill was also passed on to select file, and I believe it was actually passed on with a unanimous vote for the Senate. No one voted in opposition. Some people did not vote at all, though. Another issue we focused on a lot earlier on was the promotion of livestock expansion. Just really quickly, because I feel like we've talked about this quite a bit. LB 550 was introduced by Senator Shills. The bill had some just technical issues. And just given the makeup of the body and just the tone of this session, that bill did not make it out of the Ag Committee this year. It will not make it out of the Ag Committee this year. But we will be working hard over the interim trying to address some of the challenges that the bill faces, and those include, finding and being able to present economic impact data to senators who basically need that extra push to buy into the use of funds to promote livestock expansion, state funds. Also identifying sustainable funding sources. Obviously, money is always an issue. Obtaining urban buy-in. And then another issue that we'll certainly be thinking about going forward is the idea of there are certain maybe not enough incentives out there to promote livestock expansion here in our state. But then there's also, we've heard of issues just in terms of the restrictions at the local level. For example, a recent Supreme Court case, Nebraska Supreme Court case, basically affirmed the right of townships to essentially issue environmental regulations over livestock waste, etc. And so that adds another layer of regulation and just challenge in terms of the facilitation of livestock expansion here in our state. So Farm Bureau will be taking a good hard look at all of those things during the interim. So it'll be a busy interim. Okay, now I'm going to get kind of more into like what has been up and what is coming up and kind of what we're actually find ourselves wrapped up in right now as we speak down at the legislature. LB 637 has not come up. It's on the agenda. It may come up this week. It's hard to say. It depends on how things go. But what this bill would do is would require the Environmental Quality Department, the DEQ, to conduct an economic impact analysis for any new rules and regulations which they propose, which either A, exceed federal regulations or impose costs on regulated entities. So in other words, this would probably apply to most rules and regulations they would apply. They'd have to go through, conduct this report, submit it, for the public to see and read public comment on it. And so it essentially adds another step to the regulation creation process for the DEQ. This bill is on general file. It's a priority bill of Senator Wallman's. Farm Bureau policy supports the concepts of the bill almost word for word, and we have done some digging around in some of our surrounding states. Missouri, Kansas, Iowa all have similar requirements in place for the proposition of new rules and regs, which increase costs on regulated entities. So we'll be supporting the bill as it comes up for debate on the floor, and there have been questions raised in terms of maybe the bill being overly, having several steps, a little bureaucratic, perhaps fiscal notes. There's some concerns about that. So in the event that it does run into problems on the floor because of some of those issues, we're definitely open to exploring ways to potentially streamline the process that the bill is trying to propose, mostly in order to reduce the fiscal note, maybe cutting down the number of steps while still achieving the same thrust that the bill is trying to achieve. And then the one bill that is very fresh in my mind because we spent all day on it today down at the legislature is LB 57, which would modify provisions related to the Nebraska Environmental Trust, which of course gets 44.5% of state lottery proceeds and then can use those proceeds to try to achieve certain environmental goals in the state, be it water quality or what have you, conservation. LB 57 would require the NET board to approve the sale or transfer of any land that was originally purchased with trust funds. And it would also require that the contract between the grantee and the trust board specify how lost property valuation will be offset and made up in the event that land is either transferred to a federal land management agency like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or if it was just simply placed into a conservation easement, in which case its value, if it was originally ag land, it would lose valuation due to that. And so there's been talk about paying in lieu taxes or establishing an endowment fund that would generate interest, which could be used to pay property taxes lost, things like this. This bill was filibustered pretty aggressively on the floor today. It is still being debated. It will come up for debate tomorrow morning for probably an hour and a half, which will then equal about 8 hours of debate, at which point a senator can make a motion to invoke cloture. The vote is close right now. We're working it on the floor, trying to get a vote count, trying to see where certain people who seem to be on the fence stand. So that vote, like I said, that bill will come up for a vote tomorrow morning. I guess in particular, there's some groups that are in strong opposition to it, Ducks Unlimited being one. The city of Lincoln had some problems. I believe, though, both the concerns of both of those organizations were worked out through some amendments that were adopted today by the body. And those amendments, just by the way, did not really substantially change like what the bill was able to, is going for. Also some environmental senators who filibustered for a while. And then when it seemed like everybody else had had their concerns addressed, Senator Chambers stepped in and just carried the filibuster for a couple hours longer, and that's where we're at right now. So that bill will be up tomorrow. We're hoping that we can get the votes and that it can be advanced onto the select file. And with that, I think that ends my presentation on state issues.
Okay, so do we have any questions for Anthony or Jordan, who's still on the line? Once again, if you do have a question, you can simply type it into the question box. It's in your control panel. Or you can raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you. And I see John Miller is back where I can unmute him. So John, I'm going to unmute you. There you go. Can we hear you now?
You probably can.
Yes, we can. Do you still have a question from earlier?
Well, I'm just trying to get up to speed. Sorry I was late. I had issues getting on with the iPad and gave up on that and went to the other my other computer, so I didn't get on until just a few minutes ago. So maybe I'll just listen for now.
Okay. That sounds good. Well, thank you for being on, and we do have another question that I'm going to let Anthony work on. And the question is, why is Lincoln opposed to the bill that was heard today?
Okay, so I tell you what, I was standing there and we were talking to different senators, and I don't think I ever quite figured out why they were opposed to it. I do know, though, that ultimately there was a reference to municipalities in it that the city of Lincoln did not approve of, and ultimately that reference to municipalities, Senator Larson, who introduced the bill, agreed to remove it, and everyone was happy then. I'm not sure if they just felt like somehow it would be placing a restriction on them, because I guess everyone's sort of kind of the general agreement out there is the problem isn't necessarily with the cities or anything if they tap into the funds more when not-for-profit organizations tap into the funds, purchase a tract of land, and then flip it to the federal government, like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then take the proceeds and then use them to purchase more land and place it into a conservation easement, etc., and essentially create a revolving fund. And so I think since that was sort of the intent of the bill, I think perhaps the City of Lincoln had issues on that level. But like I said, it's probably not a very satisfying answer, and I never did quite figure out what their issue was. So.
Okay, any other questions? We have a few more minutes before we get to that 8:30 time. Okay, we have another one. This one, Anthony, I'm going to let you answer again. This is, have you heard any ideas to reduce property taxes?
I can't say that I've heard any extremely innovative, creative ideas as of right now to reduce property taxes. I think everyone at the state level, including most senators, agree that property taxes are a big issue in our state, and I think that they understand that agriculture shoulders a disproportionate amount of those property taxes. But I haven't necessarily heard ideas and this really like specific technical nuts and bolts ideas on this is how we could reduce property taxes. I mean, the focus at this level is still a higher level focus. We'll get into those nitty-gritty policy details over the interim. At this point, people talk about the three-legged stool, property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes. And then they say, okay, with that three-legged stool, what is it supposed to look like for a modern tax system that incentivizes economic growth, that makes people want to live here, et cetera, et cetera. Some things I have heard that are going to be important for us to think about going forward are things such as, for the last, probably, I'm new here, but I think that Farm Bureau has probably thrown out a property tax reduction bill, property tax ag land valuation reduction bill for a long time, I would imagine. And there's been some discussion on, say we've reduced the valuation for ag land from 75 to 65%. Will that even really do anything, given the fact that the land is going to continue to appreciate as well? At the end of the day, will it reduce property taxes? There's also discussions about urban senators have started asking, why doesn't ag just pay 100%? I have to pay 100% on my property, on my house, whatever. And so there's going to be those kind of questions that we have to try to first, I guess that's what I meant by defend. And going forward, think about, what's feasible and what's achievable. Going forward, establish the policy foundation for this is why things are the way they are now, and this is where they need to be in order for ag to be successful well into the future here in our state. So.
And I think I think you answered this next question a little bit in your response to that last one, Anthony, but have you heard much about increased farmland values for taxing purposes?
Increasing farmland values.
Yeah. I think you addressed it a little bit when you talked about, some talk about why ag land gets a decreased valuation.
Sure.
So,
right. Yep.
The next question we have is the Environmental Trust Bill big enough deal that Farm Bureau should put out political capital to pass it?
Well, I think the answer to that is that first off, LB 57, our policy actually goes way beyond LB 57 and what we feel the Nebraska Environmental Trust can and cannot do. LB 57 is a step in the right direction. And to answer your question specifically, we are supporting it. We are there to provide information to senators who want the information. We pulled several people out of the chamber today and talked to them, but we are not being overly aggressive, and we are aware of the fact that there's a whole comprehensive scheme in terms of what we're trying to achieve this session, and LB 57 is one part of that scheme. And so we're there. They know we're there. They know Farm Bureau supports it. We're also being conscientious of the, I guess you would say, the wise use of political capital in relation to that bill.
Okay, we have another question, Anthony, and this one, will the compliance with the Interstate Compact by building a pipeline to Kansas set a precedence for urban areas to tap into the Ogallala Aquifer and lower availability to agriculture?
Well, I really don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to be honest.
Okay. Steve, do you have any comment on that one?
What do you think?
Get you unmuted here. Yep, you're unmuted, Steve.
Well, it's probably possible that could create that idea in someone's mind, but to go from moving oil to moving water, I think would be, you come involved in a whole bunch of different set of laws, and so there'd be a lot of different issues there, and I don't think that concerns over one would cross over necessarily to concerns over the other. I think it's really two different issues.
Okay. I got you muted. Hold on just a second. There you go, Anthony. Go ahead.
I'll also add that if you're talking about the fairly recent agreement to retire the land and then move the water through pipelines for compliance purposes with both the Republican River Compact and also the Platte River Enhancement Compact, both of those pipelines would run within Nebraska, I believe, right? And so we wouldn't be piping it down to Kansas, but I guess I was just going to add that in addition to Steve's answer.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions, so and as I mentioned, Jordan is still on the line, so if there's any national questions or federal related questions, we can sure ask that as well too. But not seeing any. We're getting right at that 8:30 hour timeline. We can go longer if needed, but Steve, I'm going to let you take it back over. I've got you unmuted now.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay, and Jordan and Anthony. Thank you, everyone, for being on. I hope that this has been helpful and a good update for you and all of the things that are going on. Wanted to particularly make note of the fact that the Lincoln County Board has been on, Lincoln County Farm Bureau Board, and also the Sherman Valley County Farm Bureau Board has been on with the webinar, and so we appreciate your participation. And again, just encourage all of you to keep safety first as you work in the fields this spring and head out and start doing more activities outside. The last comment that I would make really goes back to really relates to a couple of the questions, but it's, I think, a good time to start thinking about our policy development process for next year. As we think about all of the work that's being done that Anthony and Jordan talked about with the working to implement the policy that you've passed, this is really a good time to be thinking about changes that you would like to see either in Nebraska Farm Bureau policy or American Farm Bureau policy, and to be formulating those resolutions and those ideas in your mind. Certainly an example of that would relate to the property taxes and the issues related to the committee that's being formed here at Farm Bureau, because I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to talk about property tax and maybe some different ways of defining what we mean when we talk about lowering property tax or property tax relief for agriculture, different ways to describe that to people who are outside of agriculture. And so just look forward to all of your help as we move into our policy development season. And again, thank you for everyone being on, and look forward to the next webinar coming up here soon.
Yeah, and Steve, thanks for mentioning that. We're getting close. I know with the spring planting time and guys being busy out in the fields, that kind of depended, or we were discussing how many of these we wanted to continue on. But I think we're going to do another one here in about 2 weeks, and we've right now tentatively schedule it for the 15th of April, when we're going to try it at 8 o'clock at night. So push it back just a little bit more in the evening. That'd be 8 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock Mountain Time. So we will send out an email on that. We'll get that lined up, and so hopefully we can have all of you join us again in a couple of weeks for another webinar. And then we probably won't do another one until maybe more the end of May or maybe into June, as kind of a session wrap-up is what we're looking at. But we certainly would appreciate your feedback on whether it's important to do that, whether you will take the time or can take the time to attend more of these webinars, because we certainly want to provide any information we can to you for you guys to help make your decisions and also help be there for us when it comes time to participate and advocate on behalf of your Farm Bureau policies. So any information we can get to you folks, we're happy to do that. And this webinar I think is a good way to do that. So with that, we would welcome any comments that you have over the webinar, and also tomorrow you will be getting an email follow-up from this webinar with a link to where you can watch the recorded version if you would like, if there's any part you'd like to go over a second time, and also will be posted on Nebraska Farm Bureau's YouTube channel. So you can search for that too and look at it there. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for being on this evening, and we will see you in a couple weeks.